Why don't we just go back to how you met, how you were introduced to MSIA, and then how you eventually became a minister.
Well, I came through, I had had a job prior to this that left me marooned on an island, and that can be set aside. Just to let you know, psychologically, I was in a sort of isolated space, had not been around people, and then was suddenly introduced to this group in an evening, which was very warm and very
And you were about 22?
embracive. Yeah, 23 years old.
Okay.
And the guru guy paid attention to me. Okay. And for somebody who was coming from an outside, well, this is extraordinary. He got all these worshipers around, and he's got, he at least smiled at me and he said hello. So when I left the place, and again, this is a little bit to show why Peter would be negotiating a contract for his life, because it sounds a little strange.
Yeah, Peter, the author again, who thought he had AIDS.
It seems very strange to think, how could anybody believe that? But you have to understand, Peter had already been indoctrinated.
Right.
And so when you understand how far he was in before he would actually look at John Rodgers as one who could actually hold death from the door for him, that part needs to be understood most.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We're going to talk, Victor will share his story, and then we'll get into some more of the principles, like the psychological aspects of how the heck, it can get to that point where you believe every word of the leader of your cult, even when the words are unbelievable.
And that was the way it was for me. I mean, I would second guess my own reality. In fact, it was a practice of mine when I became a member of the inner staff, the core, that I would check with John Rodgers what was an interpretation from my dream. And if it was completely counter to what I thought, I would take his. Now, I didn't get directly, I was not a staff member right away. There was a year where I went to Colorado and I spent time working and meditating. I had bought a picture of him because one of the meditations involved mocking up images of your teacher and using him as a guide. And at some point, if you did the meditation right, he would appear to you in the spiritual world in your inner meditation. And that's when you knew you had contact.
And did you?
I did. I was actually in San Diego at the time. Vincent and I had gone down there to stay for a while. And I was basically on a fast for 8 days, and I was doing meditation, morning to night.
What was the fasting all about? Why that?
It was just a matter of, partly because I hardly had any money, and then the other thing was just a certain kind of cleanse, and this was my goal, is to find out how I could connect to this person spiritually.
So you got to the seminar, you were immediately impressed, and then you
went out to California.
Okay.
And we went down to San Diego for this period of time. This is basically in 77-ish or so right now, as I recall. I finally had this moment where this man appeared. He was in kind of a golden light. I was sitting there quietly in my meditation, and his penis was exposed.
When you saw...
Listen here, I was shocked. I was in this totally serene place. I finally got my goal. Only there's this one thing out of place. I cannot tell you. It's like waking up from a dream when you're falling off a cliff and you're just shaken awake.
When you say you saw him, do you mean you saw him with your eyes
inwardly?
Closed?
Absolutely. Inwardly, I was in this space, and finally the thing was achieved where finally you got that space where you're going to see the spiritual traveler, the mystical traveler. That's what this guy was supposed to be. This was the culmination of, John Rodgers. He said that you had to practice and practice, and then he would appear to you inwardly, and then he would connect with you and lead you to the higher realms. That's the way this was. It's called soul travel. And you were supposed to be able to hook up with this mystical traveler, and he would lead you out of the body into the higher spaces.
So you didn't like see him as an image before you with your eyes open. You saw him with your mind's eye.
It was in the mind's eye.
Got it. Okay.
Now, what would you think would happen if somebody had that experience? What would you do if you had that? What would go to your mind?
It's such an odd detail to be
right. So what would be your conclusion?
Honestly, if I was young and impressionable, I would wonder, am I attracted to this man, or do I have some kind of untapped uh, knowledge or desire for this man that I'm not aware of? You know, I would start to question my own sexuality, probably.
Fantastic. And exactly what I did. I
Yeah.
came out of there feeling absolutely depraved to take this high, holy moment that had just happened. And there was something so dark and sinister and so redeemed
Yeah,
about me
yeah.
that I had suddenly ruined the whole thing. Now,
So you felt really guilty.
again, but then let's go back psychologically. If
Yeah.
you were actually a scientist about this and looked at that, what else could have been a conclusion at that moment?
That you hadn't eaten in 8 days and you were
That,
meditating all the time?
or the fact that this man had designs on you. And this was a spiritual world saying, here he is, and this is what it's really about.
So you're suggesting there may have been a spiritual connection between you two?
I would simply say that the spiritual world, which was what I was connecting to, may have been leaving me a message pretty plainly saying, listen, he's definitely wants this to happen.
Okay,
It
this is
happening.
interesting because
But I'm just saying that when you go into these cults, everything is about attribution and interpretation. I honestly was given a moment of grace there. Had I been able to perceive and see things as they were, I would have headed out the door the other way.
like this is his intention. And that's a
Precisely.
foreshadow of what your experience
He
would
wasn't
be
going
like.
to hit on me technically for another year. But the fact that I had so put this down as myself being impure.
What a curse to have that vision, because then when he did hit on you,
Well,
you felt this is foretold.
there's a long way to go. That was 1 year. But the thing is, he had taken me on staff, but he never hit on me, really. He was just, there's a sort of way he preened me. We'd be driving along.
Can we hold on to that
Okay,
for a
go ahead.
second? Because if people missed the audio at the beginning of this live stream, because the audio wasn't working, but we'll have it up when we put the episode up as a real YouTube video. You talked about religion in a pejorative way. At least it came off to me like
I used the word cult for
you
it.
used the word cult, but you also equated this cult with Christian cult, Lutheran or whatever it was. You were a
Missionary kid, right?
you were a missionary kid. You were in Madagascar, and you said that your father, was teaching imaginary things to people there, and da da da. So I got the impression that you were like atheists. You were quite dismissive of all things spiritual, and then you say now though that you had this vision, and you really think that vision was from the spiritual world.
Without question. But let me
Okay.
just go back. I wasn't talking about my father's work as being necessarily negative. I'm just looking objectively at what takes place here.
Got it.
Cults are cults.
Got it.
In the Bahamas, the Lutheran church is not called a church. It's called a Lutheran cult, Baptist cult, Christian,
Sure.
all this stuff is just named that way.
Got it.
And the what happens for children when they get born into these things, you don't question these things.
Of course.
You live. It's like the water you swim in
Yeah,
every
yeah.
day. So, I mean, I don't remember even questioning whether there was a God until I was like 18 years old, 17.
yeah.
I mean, it's like the first time. Do you imagine that? But so these things were just sort of accepted non-critically. Now
Okay.
the question is, you now get into another group. And one of the things you've been raised with, of course, is homosexuality. I mean, I didn't even know what it was until I was in late high school, but then it was clearly told to me that it was like the worst
Yeah.
sin in the world. So when I'm in this inner place and get this religious experience that I've been working hard, fasting to get,
Yeah. If you're 8 days into something
right?
intensely,
And then all of a sudden
nonstop,
this happens. It's like shocking.
So
It
you
shocks.
so you thought it was an image or a message to say what?
Well, to me, it was that I was so depraved that I would impose
okay.
sexuality over this holy
I
man.
see.
He became holy. It had nothing to do with him, what I was seeing. I'm just saying another part of a person who was a scientist would say, well, that's very interesting that he would show up and I would have that. Might that have something to do with him? that was never, ever even
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think we need to get to a place in spiritual science where we ask
Spiritual
those
science.
questions.
Would a scientist, I actually question whether a scientist would say that had something to do with him, because they would say that was just a vision of yours and it had nothing to do with his, unless you somehow had, you said in that first seminar that he was paying a lot of attention to you, or at least some attention to you. So I think someone who didn't buy into the spiritual world, which, if someone says they're a person of science and they're very, they might dismiss anything spiritual, then they would say, well, maybe you did that one either because you were fasting for 8 days and meditating, and maybe you just had maybe you had some inner guilt and you thought that would be the most guilty thing you could do, is make sexual something sacred. Or they might say you were at the seminar with him and he was paying attention to you, so maybe it was sort of placed in your mind, oh, this guy's, I think he likes me, or I think he likes me like that. But anyway, that's all.
Well, if I had
speculation,
been with a scientist of the psyche, which is called psychologists or psychiatrists, they would have probably brought that up right away. Well, listen, do you think there might have been a part of you trying to tell yourself about this?
Yeah. But it's your belief though that this was from the spiritual world and it was a message to you. A warning.
My look at the world is that there is a spiritual side of all things,
Yeah.
and that I don't even separate it necessarily from my physical world as much as just a part of an interpretation.
Sure.
And all that we do, what we're doing right now, is spiritual. I mean, you're talking, and I'm listening, and I'm getting what you're saying, and there's nothing here material that's going back and forth.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you got people listening on YouTube. They're watching this stuff. There's nothing material that's happening here other than thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts are spiritual things.
So continue your story from when you had that vision of naked John Rodgers.
Well, then again, that just got put in me.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, that's about another month later, Vincent and I went to the big summer festival. And at that point,
for this group,
and
MSIA.
Yes, that's right. And
Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness.
about 1,000 people showing up.
Wow. And what year was this?
This was 1977 now.
So the organization wasn't that old at this point.
Well, this was, I would say maybe 7 years of whatever.
So, I would say so. It's so impressive when I read this story at the beginning of the book, and he mentioned how John Rodgers started the organization, we talked also about him being a plagiarizer, but he nonetheless started his own organization, and how it grew fast, and he got people to believe that he was special, and they gave him money.
Let's face it, he didn't have to sit and create anything. He stole the cosmology from Eckankar entirely, word for word.
Yep.
Set it up.
Eckankar being another.
Again, they're Minneapolis-based. That's their headquarters. They used to be in Las Vegas and Menlo Park.
Okay.
But they ripped off their tradition from Northern India.
Yeah,
so
got it.
None of this is like, if you don't have to actually birth your own cosmology, pretty easy. You just rip it out and then claim you were the source.
Yeah, well, he was a good salesman, though, nonetheless, evidently.
Right.
Anyway, continue.
So anyway, this event, actually, the 77, it was, I forget where it was in Los Angeles, but it was, do you know Dave Mason? Remember the Mystic Traveler? He's the Unraveler. Really important rock song of that time. And he was actually singing for the event. And it was pretty amazing to have like number one rock man up there singing this guy's praises.
Yeah, it always helps to start an organization like this from Hollywood because, well, one, people in Hollywood, one might say they're susceptible to this kind of out there spirituality, but then also, or let's just say alternative spirituality, not the traditional, because they probably look down on traditional. Who knows? I don't want to judge, but it seems that a lot of these do originate in Southern California. But then, too, if you can get some celebrities on your side, which this
they're
book
very
is
successful
into,
at that, right? As is Scientology. That's their whole point.
Then you have all that star power, and it lends credibility to it. Like, wow, if this person, whatever. But
cults are all about creating credibility by association. That is like a manic process for them to gather as many people around that they can stand next to give them credibility.
By the way, for viewers at home, I'm going to be checking questions throughout. So Chris has a question, and I'll be trying to blend these into the interview as well. So Chris asks, so are you or would you at this point in your life, I guess as you are now, equate Christianity or Catholicism as a cult?
Well, I would say there are two sides to Christianity. It can be practiced as a cult, or it can be practiced, in my view, as a science.
Okay. And when you say cult, again, you're not looking at it like evil or bad.
No,
necessarily.
I'm saying you go to, say, if you're a Catholic, you go to a cathedral
Yeah.
and you have a person who is your teacher, leader, whatever, that does this Mass. The Mass is word for word spoken, used to be Latin, but they've tried. So there's this whole process by which you and the rest of the community gets elevated in some way together as a group, and you have an experience of some kind. The Eucharist is that. It's kind of like they look at it as transforming this material into substance that is spiritual.
I think people are going to have a tough time with your designating all
Of course they
religions
will.
as
I mean,
because
you have-
cult has this. And in fact, I think even the definition anymore would label cult as something.
Well, let's just change it to dangerous cults and regular cults, because frankly, the word is an English word.
Yeah,
Is
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the exact definition is. You might be right about that.
Oh, it is. It's clear. But at the same time, it's fine with me. I would say that there's a certain danger in any cult these days. If you are one who should not be just believing, and there's a part of us that is developing something that requires we step beyond these things and think for ourselves, if you will.
Yeah.
There's no intermediary needed, I guess is what I'm saying. And whenever you have a Catholic priest who stands there that says that they stand there between you and Christ, and then they sexually abuse you.
Well, obviously.
What is your path forward? What is your path forward? And I must say, that is the problem with cults. And I frankly have to ask myself sometimes do these cults, those kind of cults, even have the right to exist? Because what they're doing in practice is dissolving any child's capacity even to reach out to a spiritual base. They have been cut off from it.
Yeah, well, then that's sort of where you get into issues of, the medicine being worse than the illness.
Oh, yeah,
so
well,
if you call cults an illness,
it is. I mean, in many respects, there are dangerous cults like that.
But if the medicine is to, make it illegal to have them, that medicine might be worse than that.
Well, I would say only if the law comes in and says, listen, this is happening so often, you have become a public nuisance. Then I would say you're at the point where you actually lose the right to have a cathedral down the street where you're taking people and treating them that way. I would say that becomes a social decision that has to be made when it becomes that dangerous. And I'm not saying all cults are dangerous. I mean, churches are very important, and religion is very important for people, especially being raised as a child. I look back at my missionary upbringing. There were so many things that I learned and I value to this day, gain this value. I'm not denigrating any of that.
Okay.
But I am saying that cults are cults, Cults are the process when, as a child, you look up with a natural sense of surrender to somebody who's going to take care of your spiritual life and handle it as if it's a holy thing. Then you have the other side of things where people misuse that. But
we got another question here. Moose says, what was the point of this cult? What was the goal? So let's go back
that's
to
good.
MSIA and
so
what was
the Shabda Yoga path, let's go to the source, because these guys are just copying. Both Eckankar and John-Rodgers just copied it. So there's a tradition in northern India, the Sikh tradition, where they actually practice mantric yoga, where they're given 5 names, which are 5 names of God that are used and practiced and meditated on they recommend about 2 hours a day. So you're basically tithing your time to do this. And what the goal is to find your connection to the word. Now, the word to them is the primordial sound from which all things are created.
Sound.
In Sanskrit, it's called nada. That is the primordial sound from which all things have been streamed into creation.
Is it like Om?
That would be
kind of thing?
Exactly. So you would find these sounds. They would use different ones. There were 5 names of God that they would give out to these people who are masters were incredibly good at making these things real.
Sure.
There was a guy named Julian Johnston who came out as a Baptist minister who himself got converted to the Sikh path.
Okay.
And he claimed that what they were practicing is what we have extant in the Gospel of St. John, where at the beginning it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and
Uh-huh.
the Word was God.
Uh-huh.
He was in the beginning with God. So that foundational sort of discussion in John, the gospel, is what they were practicing.
Okay.
So Julian Johnston became a convert. Paul Twitchell ended up using his book called The Path of the Masters and copying things out of his book to create his own writings that became Eckankar.
And then that's where MSIA.
And john-rodgers was one of Paul Twitchell's students,
Got
and
it.
he ripped off all that, and so he came with a pre-prepared religion. So he was just out, and I actually got connected to, I think there is a seed of truth in all that was being taught here, because the idea was you meditate and you find yourself in that stream of creative of wisdom, and you're able to travel on that sound current, as they say, and this
Okay.
requires a master that the Indian tradition has. That's why your master's there. They guide you inwardly up into the higher heavens. You get to this place where there's perfect positive, and then you don't have to reincarnate. That is a sort of Sikh tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Over here, when it gets translated into john-rodgers, they take away the asceticism. They take away vegetarianism. They make it comfortable so john-rodgers can eat his steaks and, have his homosexual relationships or do whatever. And, he can still be the guru. It's just an accommodation to Western society.
So long story short, the purpose of MSIA was to achieve spiritual enlightenment,
Right.
but done in a from the Sikhs.
For the Sikhs, who gave all the 5 names of God immediately.
Yeah.
john-rodgers had them broken out, so you had to work 2 years
In
for
that tradition, then.
right? But every time you paid a little bit more, and you end up buying your way into your heaven, I guess, in a way.
Got it. Okay. So let's go back to that concert. So in your story.
So then at the middle of this concert, it was quite an event.
And again, it's
actually.
1977.
1977.
You're watching an outdoor concert.
And Vincent and I, not an outdoors, inside at
Okay.
the San Gabriel Auditorium,
Got
and
it.
it was spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
And so Vincent and I, everybody was going out to get their lunch and stuff.
And for
we-
those who missed the audio in the beginning, Vincent
Vincent was my connection that got me into the movement originally,
Okay.
and through a guy named Michael Bookband, who gave me a light study and gave me Mark Harmonic reading, and basically dissolved any sort of
So by this
resistance.
point, you've had this vision. Also, you had the meditation. So
Right.
so you're on your way. Like
I'm
you,
prepped.
Yeah, you
I'm
buy
at,
it. You
and
buy
I'm
into
now in this little group of at the Oddfellows Hall where I first met John. There was probably 200 people.
it. Mm-hmm.
This is well over 1,000. This pop star up there singing, and all the
And
rest.
who is the pop star again?
Dave Mason.
Dave Mason.
Dave Mason, get on. I mean, he's the Mystic Traveler.
Okay,
Go
well,
listen
I
to
don't know the
Mystic
man, but-
Traveler.
Yeah, I'm always up
Right.
to learn a Mystic Traveler.
He had some other really great tunes too. The guy was fantastic. I knew him well before I got into this. So the fact that
Oh, wow.
he was up there, I was like, my God, this is amazing. Vincent and I sat in the auditorium. It all emptied. And we were sitting there talking over the sort of event that had just happened so far. We're waiting. john-rodgers comes walking in and goes down all the way through the seats to talk to us, right? And he invited me at that point to come on a retreat that was happening right after this event up in Lake Arrowhead.
Where's that?
It's north of Los Angeles. You go, it's a little bit north.
Okay.
Whatever,
Southern California.
About an hour ride from up in the mountains. It's a very beautiful place.
Yeah.
And they had property. The church had property up there, and there was a retreat. And obviously, it had been long since sold out. And so he said to talk to Polly McGarry, who was one of the staff members there, and she would arrange it. And when by the time I did talk to Polly, I realized that this was like a huge thing that just happened because people were waiting in line, and I'm being advanced to the front of the line. And so I ended up going up there to this retreat, and that retreat is after hearing these seminars night after night. He then had invited me to join the staff. Now, what is staff?
Wow.
That means
You were brought up to the front of the line here.
Are you kidding? I mean, it's like I had no idea what was happening, nor did I
Yeah.
even appreciate.
Do you think he did it now looking back because you're a handsome young man?
I have absolutely no doubt that this is just a process of preening. It's just absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
there were other staff members that were there, and I worshiped them. I said, wow, it would be amazing to do their work, getting to travel with this guy all the time, set up and do the audio, and do. I mean, I just figured this would be my life. I mean, my dream.
Let's break this down. I mean, so at this point, I can clearly see how you at 23 or 4 would have been just completely taken in by this whole experience. What I want to break down is how John Rodgers got to this point. So we don't have to go through his childhood or anything like that, but he was always kind of he was always a different kind of person. He taught high school, and according to the book, a principal walked in and he had the lights off and the students were all meditating or something like that. And the principal's like, well, "What are you doing?" He taught English, and so he was apparently quite interested in spiritual things. Apparently this happened after he was in a coma for 9 days or something like that.
He had a kidney operation, as he says. He went out, and he said that he went out of his body. When he came back, he wasn't there anymore. Because his parents or something were there, and he called, and he didn't respond to Roger. And he said, "No, I'm John."
Okay.
And he
Roger was his birth name.
His birth name, Roger Hinkins. And so now he became, after this event, this new spiritual being had
after the
entered
coma.
him. Right.
Yeah.
This new spiritual being had taken over his body, named John.
Okay.
John the Beloved.
Got it.
Said,
Okay.
So that's how he came upon his spiritual.
And this was young adulthood. So then he became a teacher.
Well, he was already a teacher. This is after,
Okay.
I think actually, I don't know. I mean, the cynical part of me says he needed a segue from being a high school teacher to become a guru. And he'd already started these things with 3 of his high school. One was a teacher and another 2 were students of his, became managers in his church, and some are still there.
He was just, I mean, there are, it's one of these things where it's like, man, this computer hacker, he has so much talent. If he just would have used it for good instead of for robbing banks and breaking into systems, he wouldn't be in prison today. Da da da. It sounds like, man, if this John Rodgers guy would have somehow, because he was, I mean, he had just initiative, right? And reckless abandon, and he just went for things, and he had a lot of conviction about him being maybe delusional, I don't know, about him being special.
He was raised a Mormon.
He was raised a Mormon? Okay.
If you want to understand the cult side of things and where you go from there, you can actually study that and understand how a lot of things fit into place.
Sure,
and
but there's millions and millions of Mormons, and there's only one John Rodgers.
Right.
So
and the thing is, when you want to look at it and say, listen, I can't say that I did not get any value from that cult. I really did. There were so many things that in my life I'd say there was no other way to have this experience other than what I did. I mean, who else has flown the Concorde twice? Yeah. Twice, not once, twice. I mean, it's like what he would do was create these sort of first-class operations, and he would travel around the world. So there was no other way he could have created a life other than creating himself as God. He decided to be God for his people.
He would then, be accused of all sorts of awful things: abuse, sexual abuse, theft, and all this.
Later.
But what I'm wondering is if from the outset, he didn't have these good intentions.
Well, the thing is, the picture that I used to meditate on when I was in Colorado, the first year before I actually was on staff with him, they recommended to get a picture. So I had gotten a poster picture of him, and
is that the picture you have?
Yeah,
now?
you can take a look.
Yeah,
I mean, this is not the John Rodgers that most people would probably think of, but this is the one. This is the one that was on my wall that I would meditate on and try and create an image of.
This is the John Rodgers that you met.
Yeah.
He looked
Basically,
like this.
Yeah.
And so in this, he looks a bit more presentable. What's funny is, images of him later on, he looks quite weathered and just
Well, I mean, look
overweight.
at me. I was very young at one time too. But
yeah,
the point
but he
is,
looked like 10 years older than he really was. I mean, he looked like he didn't take care of himself anymore.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I've often asked myself, did he go into this with good intentions, or was he conning people from the beginning?
Right. That's kind of the question.
It's a really difficult question. Yeah. And I, having lived and whatever next to him, there's a part of me that, at least knowing him from the very beginning, when I first met him, that there were other people around him that had relationships with him that just seemed to match up, that this guy was for real.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, I was brainwashed.
Right.
I mean, even looking back on it.
Yeah. And again, at your place at 24, you walk into this place, there's already an auditorium of people there, so it feels like this guy's for real, right? And then you have this image of him. I mean, it all adds up. But again, from the start, for him to walk up to the very first people and suggest, "Hey, I'm enlightened," or "I'm whatever."
He didn't do it first. He was actually giving his seminars for Paul Twitchell.
Oh, he was already. So that's kind of how it.
He was actually
evolved from
channeling
there.
Paul Twitchell,
Okay.
and then he went to Las Vegas after Paul Twitchell died.
Paul Twitchell, the leader of
Leader of
another.
Eckankar,
Okay.
which is down here in Shakopee or whatever.
All right.
Here. So he goes up to Las Vegas where they're going to pass the mantle of the traveler consciousness,
I see.
expecting full well he's going to be invited up and he's going to take the rose from Gail
Mm-hmm.
Twitchell. He wasn't chosen.
Yeah.
So he went off and just
read
did his
that in
own
the book.
thing, you know.
Okay. So Chris is just chiming in with, there you have it, occult. You're meditating on an image of Rogers. Ah, yes, the serving man. So yeah, so Chris is just pointing out that here you are having a human being as a god, and whatever, which
But in the Indian
that's
tradition,
what
that
happens.
is the way they do it. I mean, your
they
master,
have their guru.
The guru is the guy who stands there to lead you to God, and so,
So
you really,
worship the guru.
you in a way you do. You honor them, and honestly, it becomes a holy thing. They become holy men, and there's nothing wrong to
Do they
be.
become godlike?
Well, what is it for a person who's not holy yet? When you look up to somebody with reverential awe, the way you did to your father and mother when you were little, if you quite honestly, they are gods to you when you're young. I mean, and that's what the difficulty of divorce is.
Yeah, right.
Two gods disappear and you have the sky as rent for you. I mean, it's very difficult for a child to have the two most holy people in their life just suddenly separate. I mean, it's cataclysmic.
Right. But as an adult,
As an adult,
You
you'd
can-
expect you'd be able to have the maturity to be able to see something further. And that's all of this is about. Me at 23 not being mature enough to take the signals from the spiritual world that were clear, evidentially, and I should have just interpreted them differently. But that's the whole point. These cults have ways of interpreting things. Go to Scientology. Go to any one of these. They control the interpretation.
sure.
And it's just the way how they work. And if you are going to buy their interpretation and not your own rational understanding, your critical thinking, they've got you. And that's the first thing to go in cults, critical thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to abandon. I mean that goes for. I mean, if you're going to believe in a spiritual world, you have to believe in the unbelievable, though.
Well, let's look at
It's
that
almost
prospect.
it's almost a requirement. I
Well,
think.
well, again,
Whether
let's-
it's a
let me be the
miracle-
counter one to you.
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
that.
Yeah.
I would suggest you, if you yourself were to say, okay, let's just pretend that a spiritual world exists. Take the most cynical human being, and take, for example, a statement that I've found to be true, that more than one miracle happens to you every day. And if you don't notice it, you're just not paying attention. No, live your life as if that is true for a week, 2 weeks, and find out if it's not so. Then ask yourself, well, how do I attribute those miracles? Those miracles will guide you to certain understandings about what it is you've been missing all your life in order to have your cynical view of things. I'm not in any way a cynic when it comes to actual spirit. I mean, it is a proven thing to me. I was told one time that a guy had told me that said, nobody can meditate on the first 14 verses of the Gospel of St. John every day for a year and not have their entire life transformed. I said, okay, there's science for you. Okay, take that
Yeah, there's your
theory,
experiment.
right?
Yeah.
Go for it. I suggest you do it. See what happens in a year. It's shocking.
Personally, you do believe that in that.
It has been proven to me. It has been proven to me. I mean,
You did this after you left the cult.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
And there's
are you a Christian man today?
I would say I don't. The Christianity I practice is something far more. It's not a church Christianity at all.
Sure.
It has to do with the fact that I can go in and mock up a picture of John-Rodgers and have him appear to me. That is the sort of Christianity. That is the living presence of this being that we call Christ. And that, to me, it is somebody who he is there whenever you need. Here at this interview anywhere.
Uh-huh.
But again, it's not something you have to believe. It has to be something that you have to come to through an experience. And once that experience is there, it's unshakable.
I agree with that, but I don't know if people have to have an experience. I think the idea of believing in the unbelievable has comfort in people.
Absolutely. And there's nothing
You
that
can
is...
rely on that. It's, I don't know, it's something tangible.
Okay.
Maybe there's more. Maybe there's even more temptation to follow a man like John Rodgers than there is to accept Christ as your Savior, because you can see John Rodgers. He's right here,
Right.
and maybe there's
that was a part of his con. When he first met me and I had a chance to talk with him, he said, Victor, you feel that? Functional reality. We don't believe, we don't deal in faith. We deal with functional reality. That was what he said.
And would he look at you like that? Was he that?
Exactly just like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I never forgot that impression of this functional. It's like, okay, that is what I'm going to be to you as God. That was what he's saying. All he needed from me is complete surrender. And I gave him that for a long period of my life before I found out this is just like totally screwed up.